Dates, Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. Thank you for joining this webinar on nonprofit fundraising in a bad economy. The format for today's webinar will include a presentation followed by time for questions and answers. There is a toolbar on the right side of your screen. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please type it in the box. And I will either reply to you or hold the question until the end for the panelists to answer. However, today's presentation, if you do have a question while we are on that slide, please submit it, and I will be kindly interrupting our presenter today, and we'll have him answer that question to make it more of an interactive presentation. Please also, at this time, under the audio tab, select if you're listening through a telephone or speakers. You will be muted throughout the presentation. To hide and unhide this toolbar, simply click on the orange arrow at the top. Today's presentation will be by Zoot Velasco. Zoot breakdanced and pop-locked into the arts when he was 12 in 1975. Since then, his passion of teaching has brought him to schools, juvenile halls, prisons, malls, and hospitals under 16 grants and numerous commissions. His 3 years of arts residencies with gang members in prisons and schools culminated in co-creating the 1992 CAC LA Riot Recovery Program in Watts with the California Arts Council and the 1994 Los Angeles Earthquake Recovery Program. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Performance from St. Mary's College and a professional designation in Arts Education from LA County Arts Commission, where he taught master's classes in theater education curriculum design. From 1994 to 2000, he managed a prison arts program, creating the first inmate music CDs produced in prison, the first youth deterrent program in the form of a play, and a handmade books and museum collection at the Getty, Hammer, and Library of Congress. In 2000, he managed all cultural programs in the Harbor area and opened 4 new art centers for the City of Los Angeles Cultural Affairs Department. In 2002, he left the city to work as a nonprofit arts consultant. He became a certified fundraising executive, CFRE, and raised over $20 million for various nonprofits. At the helm of the Unusual Suspects Theater Company in 2004, he developed a theater program at juvenile facilities countywide, growing the organization from an $80,000 to over $650,000 budget and adding 6 new sites. In 2005, he led the Homeland Cultural Center in Long Beach to a new capital campaign and a new strategic plan, doubling the existing programs and building a theater and recording studio. In 2007, he became the executive director of the Muckenthaler Cultural Center in Fullerton, growing it from a $430,000 organization serving 10,000 to an $870,000 organization serving 30,000 in just 3 years, winning several prestigious regional awards. He is involved in the Rotary Club of Fullerton, Fullerton Chamber of Commerce, Fullerton Collaborative, Fullerton City Community Development Commission, Culture Shock LA Dance Company, and Fullerton Theater Directors Roundtable. He is married to Manette Velasco, a magazine production editor for IEEE Computer Society and former lead of Miss Saigon on the 2nd National Broadway Tour. Thank you for joining us today, Zoot.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be doing this on a webinar because for breakfast, I decided to have green eggs and ham. So I had eggs with homemade pesto I made with way too much garlic. So I'm really glad that you're on the phone and not live. So you ready for me to begin?
Yep, it's all yours.
Okay, great. So welcome, everybody. This is kind of different for me doing a webinar, and I'm an old performer, so I'm used to having a live audience, and it's kind of hard not to have any reaction. So I'm going to picture you all out there in your underwear listening to me and reacting to me. Let's see. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Muckenthaler and the kind of successes we've had in the last few years and how we got there, and hopefully it'll help some of you all with your situations wherever you are, whatever you are, and be happy to talk to you about and answer questions as we go along or at the end. Let me see, make sure I can get my, make sure I can get my thing working here. Okay, so I really can't give you any magic pills, magic beans, or magic bullets. That's going to make things work for you. I can't really tell you, what is good for you. I can only tell you what happened for me, and and my story, and hopefully a lot of it's universal and will apply to you as well. So I always, like to start at the beginning. I came here in June of 2007, and I like to use Barry Bonds as a kind of great example of what 2007 was all about. He was the athlete of the year that year, and as we found out later, was taking large quantities of steroids. And I think that's a great analogy for our economy in 2007. Our stock market, our real estate market, everything was in this huge bubble. Everybody was spending more than they had, doing more than they could afford. And that was kind of the whole country, the whole world was living on a bubble. So it's a great analogy for me. And the Muckenthaler, when I came here, was no different. We were definitely on steroids. We had a $550,000 budget, which was inflated by $140,000 of a loan from our endowment, because the actual budget was $410,000, and they were borrowing money to kind of make ends meet because they were spending way more than what they had. There were some great programs happening with very little marketing, and there were no performing arts programs happening. And I realized that you all are cultural organizations, preservation organizations, and some of the cultural things do not apply to you, but hopefully you'll bear with me and see that some things are definitely applicable. So there were some good things happening here. We had some good gallery exhibits going on with nobody attending them because there wasn't a whole lot of marketing happening. There were some great staff that were hired here, and the staff were kind of feeling beat down by the lack of attendance and things that were going on, and were kind of feeling blamed for a lot of the failures that were happening at the time when I took over. We had some popular classes in place. The classes were few and far between, but the ones we had were very popular. And then we had a wedding business that was brought on by the former director, and the wedding business was causing a lot of problems, but it was also bringing in some much-needed cash. And then there was one fundraiser a year, which was an antique car show. It was the oldest and largest in Orange County and had a great reputation, but the car show committee was spending more money than they were bringing in. Well, that's not true. They were spending a lot of money and not bringing as much as they should have been, so I should say. It could have made a lot more money than it was at the time. So that's kind of where we were when I started in 2007. We had 35% of our budget came from the wedding income. We had a loss on our earned income because of a new theater program that had been started, and that was sucking a lot of money out because it wasn't bringing in any people as it was anticipated to do. And we had 20% of our income came from municipal support and 10% from our one fundraiser a year. So basically 65% of our income came from three sources. And that's one thing you want to look at with your organizations is, do you have all your eggs in a few baskets? If you do, that's probably not a good way to exist. You want to have multiple baskets for your eggs. So we're going to flash forward to 2010 at the end of our strategic plan that we did in 2007. And we now have a $725,000 budget. Actually, now we have close to $900,000 budget, but at that time it was $725,000. It was a 61% growth in 3 years. By 2011, the end of our strategic plan had doubled in growth. And our weddings were now 26%, slightly less, because we had many other sources of income. So we had earned income, we had corporate sponsorship, municipal support, grants, fundraisers, and we had multiple fundraisers and memberships. So now 80% of our income came from 6 sources, and that made us a lot easier to weather storms. So when we had a storm with some cut of our municipal support, we were able to weather it because we have more diverse income. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So this is kind of a chart of where we were and where we are. And this goes through 2010 because I just wanted to kind of do a 3-year slice for you. It's continued to rise since then, but I wanted to kind of hit those lean years when we were all suffering and how we did well during that time period. So that purple arrow is is when I came in. That kind of slices right through when I started. And you can see at the time I started, our expenses were way higher than our income, and our income was just starting to come out of a really big fall when they tried this new theater program that was unsuccessful, and the marketing was non-existent. So, so we had a big rise in income and at the same time cut expenses, and then kept our expenses kind of in correlation to our income. And we'll talk a little bit about how we did that. Okay, so one of the first things we had to do was cut expenses. And I cut those in a couple of different places. First of all, we had a contractor who was doing our landscaping for $3,000 a month, and he would come in 1 day a week, cut the grass, water, and charge us $3,000 a month. I found out that I could get 5 days a week of landscaping from a staff person with a mow and blow service, where we had the contractor come in just once a week and cut the grass, and then had a landscaper on staff 5 days a week who would do the caretaking and the watering. And what was nice about that is for $200 a month less, we could have a staff person here at 29 hours a week that could do other things for us too, like set up for events. You know, when we had projects where we renovated things on the grounds, they could help with the renovations. So it was really helpful for us to have somebody who could do a little bit of everything. And we were able to find somebody who's kind of a jack of all trades. And now he's been promoted to our facilities manager, and he does, he's in charge of all of our historic renovations that we do. Every year we close down for the month of January and spend that month doing renovations to the historic property. And we've been able to renovate in 4 years the entire mansion, one January at a time. So that was really great. And not only did it save us money, but it gave us more staffing, which was needed. And then we changed our marketing. The former director is spending $15,000 a month in magazine ads, and most of that was down in South County magazines. So, you know, they were big splashy ads that you would see if you were in a South Orange County museum. And the idea, I guess, was that people would see them from a museum there, and then they'd say, oh, I have to go see the Muckenthaler, and they would come up here. But that really wasn't the case. It wasn't happening. So we changed that to spending about $8,000 a year on newsletters and postcards that were well printed, in color, and not doing any magazine advertising, and then using a street marketing team made up of staff and volunteers and interns to go out and get these postcards and newsletters out into the community at restaurants around town, at chamber meetings, at Rotary Club meetings, Kiwanis Club meetings, etc., and really get the word out through word of mouth. And that was the most effective marketing that we did. We had some cases where 2 people were doing the same job and didn't know it, and we were able to cut down on those redundancies. And then this is something that happens at a lot of institutions where you have small staff. You'll have somebody who gets paid $25 an hour spending, you know, several hours a week or several hours a day doing a job that someone who gets paid $8 an hour could be doing. And so we kind of watched that and made sure that we had someone $8 an hour doing those jobs instead of a manager who should be doing something else for their $25 an hour. So that was kind of the most effective way that we cut our expenses. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about our wedding business, because a lot of you out there who run your own historic buildings have either thought about having a wedding business or have had one or currently have one. And you'll hear everything from people saying it's the greatest thing since sliced bread to it's a total nightmare for historic property. And when I took over here, we had a wedding business that was on the verge of being the nightmare scenario. The weddings took place, 55 weddings a year. We were getting quite a bit of money from them, but the tail was kind of wagging the dog in that the weddings were kind of dictating our programming schedule, and the weddings were also very loud and noisy and tearing up the property, and there was no one on staff or on grounds at the weddings making sure things were going appropriately. and we had a very bad contract with the wedding agency, a contract that was not only inappropriate but illegal, and they weren't getting any. We were getting site fees from the weddings, but we were not getting any percent of the catering, which when I did a survey of other wedding venues, I found out is kind of a standard thing. And part of that was because they were going to build a wedding building on the site and pay for it, the wedding company was. But the city and the neighborhood were against it, and the city was also against the contract because it wasn't really legal. It was kind of a subcontract with us that was written with terms that were not appropriate. And so when I took over here, I had a meeting with the homeowners, and they were ready to hang me from the rafters until I told them I agreed with them. So we kind of squashed the building idea. That wasn't going to happen because it wasn't a very good idea for the Muckenthaler or for the neighborhood or the city. And then we changed the way we did our contract. I talked the wedding company that we deal with, Colette's Catering, into redoing our contract, which really, at first view didn't seem like it was maybe in their best interest because they had pretty much the run of the place. But, what I told them is that if they didn't redo it, we would go to arbitration over it, and it would become a big deal, and they would probably lose the venue. So they were very smart in working with us, and they've been great partners ever since. And so now we're in a situation where we have a much better deal with the weddings. We had a site fee conducted. We raised our fees. And that's one thing is if you have very low fees at your site, you think you might get more weddings, and that actually proved to be the opposite in our case. The low site brought in some really bad weddings that caused a lot of problems for us, where we had, in some cases, gang member weddings, and we had neighbors having people parking on their lawns and peeing on their lawns and getting drunk after the wedding. It was just a nightmare. And we had 180 complaints that first year from neighbors for our weddings. And when we renegotiated the contract and raised our fees and audited our past practices, which we found out that the wedding contractor owed us $18,000 in fees, which they paid us, and we assigned a foundation staff person to work security at all of the weddings and charged the caterer half of the cost for that person to work there. It was much better. Now we were getting 10% of the catering. We're getting half of the cost of our security person to work the weddings and make sure that they're not messing up the grounds, they're not being too loud or noisy, that people leave in a timely manner after the wedding is done, and they're not getting drunk afterwards in the parking lot. And all of these things, along with the quarterly homeowners meeting that we started, really changed the whole culture of the weddings. And what ended up happening was that now we get this 10% of the contractor's fees. We raised our fees by $1,000. We were at the low end of weddings in the area, the very low end, and we're a really nice mansion on 8.5 acres, historic building. So we raised to the middle end. So we're not the highest, we're not the lowest, we're right in the middle of what wedding venues cost in the area. We did that through a site survey, and so that allowed us to raise it by $1,000. We stopped having the troubled weddings. We had a better quality of wedding going on, and we were getting paid for half our security costs, and we went from 55 events to 75 events a year. So our weddings actually went up when we did this. And now we get over $200,000. We're getting close to $300,000 a year from weddings now. And our complaints went from 180 a year to 0. Our second year we had 5 complaints. Our third year we had 0, and last year we had 0. So the homeowners are happy, the city's happy, we have a better contract that the city signed off on, and the caterer has been a better partner now that we're asking more from them. They actually helped us restore some of the areas of the grounds that they use for the weddings, and they paid for half of it. So it's been a really great relationship since we got a better contract. And that's my first kind of tidbit of information for you, is to make sure that whenever you partner with anyone, that you have a contract or a letter of agreement that spells out the terms of your deal, so that if you know, they say good fences make good neighbors. Good contracts make good partners. If you and your partner know exactly what's expected from each of you and it's spelled out in writing, you're less likely to have problems with the relationship. So that's been my experience, and I do that with everything from our performing arts contractors and partners to the nonprofit partners we work with, to schools. I mean, we have about 75 different nonprofit partners here, and we do letters of agreement or contracts for each of them. So that's my first piece of advice. Make sure you have very good spelled out contracts or letters of agreement with the people you work with. All right, so with the wedding situation kind of solved, we worked on earned income. So in 2007, we had 20 events, and with all 20 events, there were only 526 attendees. That's over 20 events. It's one whole jazz series of 6 concerts and one whole Shakespeare series of 6 concerts, and then some gallery openings. Most of our events were put on by board members and their friends and family for their, basically for their friends, with very little marketing. So we kind of had the look from the outside of this wealthy place on the hill, this mansion, and kind of a private club, because people were putting events on for themselves. So it gave us a bad reputation. And then their classes that we had were based on a percentage. So the teachers were responsible for getting the marketing because they would get 60% of the classes and we would get 40%. And that meant that we were losing money because we wasn't paying all of our fees to do this kind of percentage structure. And it didn't really behoove us to go out and get grants to get more classes because we were going to lose 60% of it to the teachers. So we had to change that structure. So the next year we went from 20 events to 80 events. We actually, in the second year we went to 42 events, and the third year we went to 80 events. So it was kind of stepped. But we increased dramatically the number of events. And we started a street marketing campaign where we did postcards, as I said, out at all the restaurants and meetings in town to get people to find out about our events. The biggest thing that we did, though, is we changed ourselves from being a producer of events to a presenter of events. And the difference is that a producer is somebody who spends a great deal of money to produce like a Shakespeare play or a jazz series or whatever, and then produces it on stage and then hope you make up your costs by ticket sales. So we stopped doing that. We became a presenter where we presented acts that were already together. So it was a theater group that was touring through the country. We would bring them to the Muck when they came from San Diego to LA. We'd bring them to the Muck on the Thursday in between, that kind of thing. We had a great touring jazz artist or a great touring folk music artist. We would have them come to the Muck in between their tour, or if they were an LA-based group, they would come to the Muck. And we changed our way that we paid these people by splitting the door with them. So we asked them to take part of the risk, but they would be able to make more money if they brought in people. So that meant that there was impetus on them to try to bring in part of the crowd, and there was impetus on us to bring in part of the crowd. And if we didn't bring in the crowd, neither of us made money, but we didn't lose money because we could only lose 50% of the ticket sales. So that was a really helpful thing. And in our first year, we went from a $30,000 loss to about a $30,000 gain in our first year. We added more Korean and Latino themed events because 20% of Fullerton is Korean and 40% is Latino, and we wanted to reach those markets. And we added outreach classes with community partners, and we restructured our classes so that the teachers were now getting an hourly rate rather than a percentage split. And that allowed us to go out and write grants, do more outreach programs, and to bring classes out into the community, which tripled our classes in the next 3 years. So in 2010, we had 84 events with 25,000 attendees. Last year, we had over 30,000 attendees. We won awards for the 3rd straight year for our community outreach programs. We started selling out our performances. Last year, we sold out 8 of our performances This year we've already sold out 4, and we're only 2 months into our season. We got half of our programs were free or sponsored by corporate sponsors, which allowed us to bring more people in because we could offer free programs, and it kind of got rid of our reputation for being this rich place on the hill. Our students in our classes went up by 183% with the new outreach programs. Currently, we're doing programs in 5 different sites outside of the Muckenthaler. We're doing all of Chalk Hospital, a battered women's shelter. We're doing 4 foster care sites under a federal contract. And our classes make money, and we have big contracts with new partners. And next year, we're planning 3 new school districts that we're going to be partnered with to do classes in. The year before last, we had 65 events with 30,000 attendees. I'm sorry, yeah, last year we had 65 events with 30,000 attendees. Actually, 65 events are the events that are open to the public. We also had another 19 events that were members-only events that we do for our membership. So we had 84 events total. Okay, moving on. When we first started, we only had the car show as our fundraiser, and all of our corporate sponsorships were tied in with the car show. And it was about $20,000 a year annually, and the car show made about $20,000 a year annually. The second year, we added a second gala by moving a car show dinner. So the car show would have a Saturday night dinner that was put on by the women from our board, and the men from our board put on the car show. And the men and the women didn't always get along, and they certainly didn't always get along putting together the car show and the car show dinner. So we moved the dinner to be its own event in the fall, which made the 2 committees very happy that they didn't have to work directly together because they were kind of clashing. And then the fall event became a masquerade moonlight ball, and now it's morphed into another set of fundraisers and has actually turned into 2 fundraisers, a luau and a awards dinner that we have. But basically, both of those are now able to attract between $20,000 and $40,000 each of information. So, sorry, Jennifer, are you still there? Something just popped up on my screen.
Yes, okay. It's a question. You're fine.
Okay. So yeah, so we kind of got to a point now where we went from making $20,000 a year on one fundraiser to making about $60,000 to $80,000, depending on the year, on 3 fundraisers, and that was by kind of morphing one fundraiser into 2 and then 2 into 3 over the course of the years. One kind of misconception about fundraisers is that fundraisers are there to make money, and honestly, most organizations, and I learned this when I was becoming a certified fundraising professional, most fundraisers in the world do not make money. And when you look at gross, they always look like they make a ton of money, but when you look at the net income, they make very little. Most fundraisers are about getting friends for the organization, friend raisers, and that's certainly the case with our car show. I mean, if you were to put all of the energy and effort into the car show into dollar terms, it would lose money. And as a matter of fact, if we just did weddings on the weekend of the car show, we'd make about $24,000, and the car show makes about $21,000. So in essence, it kind of loses money. But the goodwill and friendship and interest in the Muckenthaler that it generates by bringing 2,500 people in over the course of a weekend is something you also have to measure when you're looking at fundraisers. But it's certainly not our main source of income, and it probably shouldn't be for most organizations over $100,000 a year. Okay, I'm going to go back here. Okay, so our corporate sponsorship, was basically all tied in with the car show, and we changed that by adding more $5,000 sponsors, and we were able to kind of use the property. I mean, one of the things that most historic properties have is a place that people want to be, either for filming or for events. And we certainly have a beautiful place for events, which is why we get wedding income. So we thought, why not use that to bring in corporate sponsorship? So we offered corporate sponsors a free event at the Muckenthaler at the $5,000 level or above. And we also figured out a way to get them some advertising by putting banners down by the street with their name on it as a sponsor and putting them on our website, which was getting more and more people interested in it. And so we were able to bring in a lot more sponsorship when they saw how popular we were getting, how much advertising they were getting, and that they could use the event for a free event for their corporate sponsorship. So that helped us a lot. And we started getting sponsors for our outreach programs. We started getting sponsors for our concert series. We started getting sponsors for our other fundraisers. And before you know it, our sponsors were up 250%. Had 5 times as many sponsors as we started with. And most of them were at $5,000 level or above. Our biggest sponsor doubled their sponsorship, went from $5,000 to $10,000, and now we have 2 $25,000 sponsors. And our gala morphed into new fundraisers, as I said earlier. All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit about our municipal support, because when we started, it was 20% of our income, and we started finding these new income sources, and that really helped us get through the lean times the last 3 years, because in 2010, the entire city budget was cut 10%, and they proposed to cut the 10% from the parks budget by basically cutting all of our money. They cut.
You're owned by the city, correct?
Yes, we're owned by the city. They used to run us until 1995 during the Orange County bankruptcy program. They gave the center to the foundation to run. So the foundation has been running it since 1995. And our contract with the city had not been redone since 2001. So we were going from a 2001 contract. And out of the 137, which was set up in 2001, they proposed to cut $80,000, which was 100% of the program money, leaving $57,000 that would be for maintenance. Well, that $57,000 maintenance figure was based on 2001 numbers, and of course maintenance was now over it was almost $108,000 in 2010 when they were planning these cuts. So we had basically a couple of different choices. We could just say yes and take the cuts, or we could fight them. And we could use the fight to kind of generate more income, which is what we did. So we fought the cuts, and it got pretty ugly. We made a big press release about the cuts, and that they were cutting 100% of our program money, and that the program money was used for outreach programs at the hospital and foster care, and bringing school tours in, and doing outreach programs. So, I mean, we really laid it on as far as what was going to be cut, and that they were leaving maintenance money, but the maintenance money was based on a 10-year-old figure and didn't even cover the maintenance. We had 120 letters to City Council, 1,200 new supporters on our Facebook page, 150 people showed up at Council to complain. We used this publicity to drive new membership, and basically what happened was the city kind of felt like they stepped in a hornet's nest. They were really pissed at me at first, and then we had some behind-the-scenes meetings where I let them know, this wasn't personal. If you were in my position, you'd do the same thing, but we can't take that big of a hit all at one time. And so they backed off. They renegotiated with us, and we ended up getting a $60,000 cut, and $12,000 of that was restored the next year. So our final cut ended up being about half of what they were originally proposing. But what happened from that fight is it generated a lot of new interest in us, a lot of new press on us, a lot of new donors that had once been donors of the Muck, liked what we were doing here and wanted to come back and help out, because they felt like we turned a corner and were doing some really great stuff here and didn't want to see it die because of the city funding. And so we ended up getting almost $80,000 of new money in from donors, and we ended up getting 800 new members. So that pretty much tells you what I just said. And then the city came back the next year, and they felt bad about the cuts and the way it went down. And we repaired our relationship all through the behind the scenes as it was happening. And they came back, and we asked them to make some capital improvements that had been waiting for 10 years. And we said, look, if you're not going to give us money for maintenance above and beyond this small amount, then please help us with the capital improvements. And they did. So they ended up doing a couple $100,000 worth of capital improvements for us that have been waiting for years to do, mostly on the roofs and the drains. So that's it about municipal funding, and now I'll talk a little bit about grants. So when I started here, we had absolutely no grants. There were no grants being written. There was nothing in the hopper, nothing. And we started writing grants for new outreach programs when we restructured the arts education programs and school tours, education. And within the first year, we had 38,000 new funding. Last year, we had over 200,000 in new grants. And most of the grants were made in networks. And what I mean by that is, anybody can write a grant and send it in, and it may or may not get funded. But when you work in partnership with other organizations and you work in partnership with the funders themselves, kind of finding out what it is they want to fund and getting them interested in the things you want to get funded, then you're more likely to be successful. And that's a great tip for people, is not to just write a grant and send it in, but invite the funders to come to your site, invite them to do a site tour, find out what they're interested in, let them find out what you're interested in, and see where you mesh, and then make that the basis for your relationship. Because everything in fundraising is basically relationship building. And we were able to make a lot of new relationships that brought in over $200,000 a year now in grants. I think I've already talked about our fundraisers kind of ad nauseum, so I won't bore you with that again. But we've been able to raise a lot in new corporate support and increase our fundraisers. So now we have this luau event that we do. We have the car show, and then we have an award dinner that we do at another site that's a larger site. It's an 800-seat theater, and we do that in partnership with another nonprofit. And between the three, we bring in about $80,000 a year now in fundraisers. Our membership, so we had just under 200 members when I started, it's about 192. But we were carrying 4,000 people on our mailing list and spending a fortune mailing to them regularly. And this was at a time when the internet was still kind of not the place to market. Back in 2007, it was just kind of getting started as a marketing tool for most nonprofits. So we had a lot of fish to fry, and we didn't really make membership the priority off the bat, but we did provide new discounts for members. We provided new incentives for members, and we had a lot of new programs happening, which made us more exciting. And our membership doubled right off the bat. We ended up with about 400 members by 2009. And then in 2010, when we had the budget cuts, we used that really to propel membership, and we got up over 800 members. And right now, we're somewhere between 700 and 800 members because we've had some renewals that haven't renewed yet. But we've kind of stayed right around 800. We're trying to get to the next plateau. And we use those budget cuts very effectively, and also use new programs. So we brought in new youth programs, new Korean programs, new Latino programs, and all of those memberships are growing now. And also our audiences in those areas are growing. And then our endowment. So when I started here, as I said, we had a small endowment. It was started out at $750,000. Over time, it had been rated, I think, several times. But there was certainly a loan made out, and it was under $300,000 when I started. the first thing we did was stop taking payments on it and use what would have been the 5% a year payments to go back into the endowment and to help build it up. We started a second memorial endowment where we allowed people to have memorial services on the property, and the money that they spent on the site fee went into the endowment, and any money they got in lieu of flowers went into the endowment. And we had a couple really prominent Fullertonians that wanted to have their memorial service here. Two of them, it was in their will. And so actually there were three really prominent people that first year that had their memorial services here. And that just those three people alone boosted our endowment by about $60,000 in site fees and in lieu of flowers gifts. And then we started doing a biannual legacy breakfast. Every 6 months we'd have a little breakfast for all of our big donors and tell them about the future of the muck and that we wanted them to be part of it by putting into their estate plans the Muckenthaler, and for anyone who would consent to do that, in writing and tell us in writing that they're pledging to put us in their endowment, we would, in their estate plan, we would put them in a new legacy club we were starting. And we actually got a couple $10,000 gifts from people for the endowment, that one $15,000 gift from people who just said, well, I'm going to give you my estate plan here now. Here's $10,000, and when I die, don't expect anything from me. So that was a nice little addition. So we were able to raise over $210,000 back in the endowment from doing these things. And we didn't take any money until this year. So in 2012, we'll take our first 5% payments from the endowment, and we'll get $30,000 a year now. We're still building it. We're getting about $50,000 a year in new gifts and $40,000 memorial funds, although we haven't had a memorial yet this year. And we were able to pay off our loan in less than 3 years, and it's completely paid off. And now we have another revenue stream from the endowment. And, I'm a big fan of endowments. I think the great thing about the endowment is that it's kind of a succession plan, because I know one day I'm going to leave here as director, and whoever takes over for me is going to have this endowment of 5% a year of money that they're going to have forever and ever and ever to help them with their fundraising. And there's no way that they can touch the principal, because we've put it into a true endowment now where it can't be loaned or borrowed from or taken out, and the principal is safe. So it's really important that you do that. And the Orange County Community Foundation, or whatever your local community foundation is a great place to partner with to do that. So that's what we're doing now. So kind of just to wrap up, the secret to the successes we've had is we started with a strategic plan when I first started here to kind of see what was broken, what needs fixing, and getting everyone involved, all the key stakeholders in that plan, so that they were responsible for helping fix it. It wasn't my responsibility, it was our responsibility. And then we started everything out. Everything we do starts with, is this going to help the mission? That was one of the key driving factors to getting the weddings under control, was that we weren't looking out for the mission, we were having the weddings drive things instead of the mission drive things. And then focusing on what our strengths and opportunities are, but also looking at what our weaknesses and our threats could be. Having great contracts with people, as I said, is a great way to partner, and great education programs help out a lot, and partnerships. There's nothing that will sell your place better than having great education programs. And I think the biggest thing people tell me of why they get involved is our attitude, and specifically my attitude. Every time I go out to a Rotary Club or to speak at the chamber or whatever, people meet me and I say, I'm the richest man in town. I'm living the dream here in Fullerton. I get this great mansion. I don't have to pay the bills. I just got to get other people to pay them. And I think people really love the attitude that we love our job, we're passionate about it, we're having fun. And all of our staff reflect that. And when people come in, we don't treat it like a museum where you have to be quiet and don't touch anything and pay something at the door. We actually make our gallery free, and we did a study that found out that when our gallery was free, we actually made the same amount of money that we made when we charged for it by having a donation box at the front door and letting people donate what they want. We actually made as much money on the donation box as we did when we were charging for people to get in the gallery. So, we kind of have a very open family attitude, and people pick up on that, and they want to get involved. And people feel like when they're members, they're part of a big family. We do lots of networking, and we do lots of work. And as long as you do those things, I think all of you can be as successful, or probably have been. Maybe I'm just reinforcing what you already know. But it certainly helped us get over the last 3 years when a lot of people were having trouble, and we were growing by leaps and bounds by doing these things. So that's pretty much it. I think I like this as a great representation, as we have a lot of people working, pedaling, from the board to the staff to the volunteers. I didn't mention our internship program. We have an internship program set up with 7 colleges, and we get about 50 to 60 interns a year here, and they do a lot of free work for us. And they love coming here because they are treated like staff, and they do real work. They don't just get coffee. And they do most of our designs in the marketing department. They do a lot of our grant writing, which then I would go back and rewrite, but it's easier to rewrite a grant than it is to write one from scratch. And I train them how to write a grant. So they actually get real-world training. They get real experience. And then what that does for us is they give us access to those 7 colleges to help bring youth in to the Muckenthaler, which is one of our goals, to bring more younger audience in. But you got to have one person driving the bus, and one vision, one plan. So that's pretty much it. I would like to invite any of you, if you're in North Orange County, to come by and visit. We have a program here every Thursday night from February through November, with the exception of Easter Thursday and 4th of July Thursday. Those 2 weeks we're off. But every other Thursday we're open. We have a festival going on, or a concert. We have a jazz series of festivals in May and June. We have a roots music, folk music festival series in July and August. 5 free festivals a year, 5 gallery openings a year, classes from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. 6 days a week, and lots of outreach programs as well. So hopefully some of you will come visit sometime and say hello and say, hi, I'm the nameless, faceless person that was on your webinar. All right, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
Sure. I wanted to start out with, can you just talk a little bit more about the Muckenthaler, how many staff you have started with and now have?
Sure.
And, like if you have different departments, things like that, how you're organized.
Sure. When I started here, we had 3 full-time staff plus me, so there were 4 of us doing everything, and then we had 1 part-time staff, and everything else was done by contractors. We had all of our artists were contracted, all of our maintenance was contracted, and now we have 7 full-time staff, 12 part-time staff, and the only contractors we have are the artists and our mow and blow service. Everything else is done by volunteers or the staff, and we have over 600 volunteers a year, including, like I said, about 60 interns a year. We use volunteers for all of our festivals and events, from National Cherry League, from the Keystone Club, the Key Clubs, the high schools, the Boys and Girls Club, Keystone Club guys, several other groups, some church groups. But we get about 600 volunteers a year, and about 100 of those are, multiple event volunteers, and about 60 are interns.
On your events, can you talk a little bit more about the transition from producer to presenter? How did you select who was going to present and who you were going to present, and was it hard to sell to the groups?
Yeah, that was actually a little easier for me than it would be for some other people, because I had been running other cultural centers where I presented groups, and I knew some groups, and I could call them as a friend and say, would you mind splitting the door, and I'll make sure I get some people and you get some people and we'll do well. And I brought in groups that I knew would do really well and be popular. And it helped to have those friendships in the beginning. I think one of the things I took advantage of here, and I've done it at every job that I've ever been at, is that I feel like your first 100 days in office, you get kind of a honeymoon grace period where you can do no wrong until you screw up. And I took advantage of that. So my first 100 days here, I made as many changes as I could that I knew would fly. And people were skeptical, but they were willing to go along because I was in my honeymoon period. So, for example, one of the first things I did was the year before I had come in, they had a Christmas event called a home tour. It was a Christmas home tour where the Center Circle, which is a women's auxiliary, mostly older women in their 70s and 80s, put together this tour of people's homes. And it was a lot of work, and they decided they didn't want to do it anymore, and there wasn't going to be a Christmas at the Muckenthaler. And so the first thing I did was I modeled a festival after the Music Center's Holiday Festival that I had been involved with before. And I decided to have it the Sunday before Christmas, which was at that time, I think, the 23rd or something. It was just a couple of days before Christmas. And my board and my staff said, you're crazy. Nobody's going to come. Everyone's going to be out of town. No one's going to come to it. And I said, look, just trust me on this. Let's go with it and see what happens. And I kind of put myself on a limb, but I really did know it was going to do well. And we used that as a template for all of our future festivals. And it was kind of a great way to kind of get something together and see if it would fly. And what happens with these kinds of things is you're the only event because everything else in the Christmas season is over. And there's nothing for people to take their family to when they come visit. We have a lot of older residents in Fullerton and a lot of older residents at the Muck that are part of the Muckenthaler. And they have nowhere to take their family. So by being just a couple of days before Christmas actually worked to our advantage because we were the only event in town. And our first year we had over 1,000 people at the festival. And it was a free festival, so we got corporate sponsorship for it. Target and a couple other people sponsored it. And we ended up getting over 1,000 people. And so my staff and my board then thought I was a Svengali or something and I could do no wrong. So it was a kind of a calculated risk on my part, but it really got people to trust me as a leader and kind of go with me when I come up with some wacky wild hair. And I've had a lot of wild hair since then, and 90% of them panned out pretty well. So people have been pretty happy with it.
Are there better days and times of the day for events?
That's an interesting question, because one of the things we did the first year is we tried stuff on every single day of the week, Monday through Saturday, and we'd have our festivals on Sunday, and we called it Seconds at the Muck, and we did it the entire second week from Monday through Sunday. The second week of the month, we would do an event. And we did that as kind of a test. We did it for 2 years, and we found out after 2 years of research that Thursdays, believe it or not, turned out to be our most popular day. And that was a surprise to me because I would have expected Friday or Saturday or Sunday would be more popular. But Thursdays was the night that we almost always sold out, or sold a lot more. And so the last 2 years we've been doing all of our events on Thursdays, and we've been doing every Thursday. And something happens in Fullerton specifically because there's a farmer's market on Thursday nights with a beer garden in town. And people go out to there, and then they go out clubbing or restaurants or whatever afterwards. And we found that Thursdays is the best night to get an audience here because people are already out mulling around, and they're looking for things to do, and there's a lot of things that aren't happening on Thursdays. They're waiting till Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We don't have to compete with all those fundraisers and events that happen Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So Thursdays has turned out for us to be the best night. And so now we do all of our events on Thursdays except for some of our free festivals, which are on Sundays still.
For your fundraising efforts, have any of the fundraising been targeted to historic preservation efforts?
Yeah, you know, before I answer that question, on the last question, when I say that Thursdays is the best for us, that doesn't necessarily mean it would be the best for you or another person out there. I think the lesson that I learned is that a lot of things that I thought would work haven't worked, and a lot of things I was skeptical would work ended up working great. And I think you just have to experiment and see what works for you and make sure that you do good evaluations of the things you try so that you can really say when somebody, like people will come up to me and they'll say, why aren't you doing classical music at the Muckenthaler? And I'll say, well, there's 7 colleges in town doing classical music, and when we tried a classical series here, it failed miserably. And because I have the research and we tried those things, I can answer those questions when people ask them, so I don't have to, you know, it's just really important to try things and then evaluate it properly when you do it. So I'm not saying you should all do it on Thursday nights. Now, yeah, you asked me a question about historic preservation fundraising.
Correct.
Unfortunately, there's very little grant money available for historic preservation compared to cultural events. So yes, we've written some grants for historic preservation. They tend to be very very competitive, and you know, some grants we've applied every year and we'll continue applying, because one thing I learned when being a grant writer is that if something is very competitive and you don't get it the first year, it's important to keep applying, because people who give grants, they want a relationship with the people they give the money to, and the more you apply and don't get it, but really listen to the panel comments of why you didn't get it and address them, but the more you keep applying and refining your grant and evolving your grant, the more likely it is that when you start to get funding, that they'll look at you as a real partner and give you funding more, you know, more than once. So we've had some funders that the first 2 or 3 years we didn't get the grant, and then we started getting them this last year, and now we're part of the dialogue with them on other grants, and they've kind of become gateway grants. Those competitive things tend to be gateway grants to bigger grants. So, so no, we haven't gotten preservation grants, although the city did get one from a Getty grant for preservation here that we helped with, but it was the city's grant. But what I'm finding is that there's a lot of things that we do through our cultural center that can be addressed with preservation as well. And one thing I would suggest for people who are not cultural centers that have preservation organizations out there is to partner with other organizations that are not preservation organizations and see if you can get grants through those channels. Like if you bring school tours in for 3rd and 4th grade tours of California and local history, maybe you can partner with school districts or homeschool networks or nonprofit schools or faith-based schools to do those school tours under grants that are not preservation grants. Or if you do other kinds of arts education, I'm sorry, not arts, historic preservation education for adults or seniors or students, there might be grants available for that that are not necessarily preservation grants. So I would look for partners in the nonprofit realm that are strategic partners to you, that offer you something and you can offer them something, and see what grants might be available through those strategic partnerships, because that's been very successful for us. We have about 75 strategic partners, and all of them are tied up with either grants or government contracts or some kind of funding.
Earlier you talked about sponsors and getting corporate sponsors now, and you did mention Target. And are most of your corporate sponsors the local or corporations, organizations?
Yeah, almost all of them are. And you know, the biggest secret for getting corporate sponsorship is to have whoever is the name and face of your organization. Usually that's the executive director, but it may be the president of the board. But whoever is good at going out and pressing the flesh and talking about your organization with passion and interest, getting that person to be part of a local service club. So in some towns, you know, it might be the Kiwanis Club is the big club that everybody who's the mover and shaker in town joins. In some towns, it's the Lions Club. In some towns, the Rotary Club. Here in Fullerton, our Rotary Club is attended by 3 city council members, the heads of all of our departments, and by the way, there's only 5 city council members. The heads of all city departments, the heads of all the banks, the heads of all the major industry in town, they're all part of this Rotary Club. And I joined that Rotary Club, and I joined the Chamber of Commerce, and I got really involved with both of them. And it was that involvement that kind of led to a lot of corporate sponsorship and support, is that people liked me as a person, and they liked what I was doing at the Muckenthaler, and they were intimately aware of it because of my relationships with them through the Chamber and the Rotary Club, and that made them want to get involved as a corporate sponsor.
Does anybody online have any more questions for Zoot? Please feel free to type them in. Okay. Well, Zoot, thank you very much for joining us today. Did you have any last-minute thoughts or?
No, but I meant it when I said I want you all, if you're in the area, to come visit. And if anybody has any questions after the webinar is over, feel free to email me. You can go to our website, themuck.org. That's the as in T-H-E, M-U-C-K, short for the Muckenthaler.org. And my email is zoot@themuck.org. And you're welcome to email me or go to our website. All of our reports are on our website, and if you want to look more closely at our annual reports, those are on our website as well, and you can see kind of a little bit more detail about the progress we've had over the last 3 years.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today, Zoot. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope it's been helpful to everyone, and you know, I hope I get to meet you face-to-face one day.
Yes. Well, later today, all of our participants will receive an email with a link to a survey, and we would appreciate any feedback on this webinar and recommendations for any future topics. I will also send an email with a link to today's presentation for those of you who would like it. I also wanted to let you know that CPF is doing webinars the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of every month, and our next one will be on advocacy, effective advocacy, by Adrian Scott Fine from the LA Conservancy, and that will be on April 10th. And also on April 24th, Jay Platt from the City of Glendale will be talking about what is historic preservation. I also wanted to let you all know, if you're in Southern California, that we will be having a Secretary of Interior Standards workshop with a facility management perspective, and that is in Pasadena on April the 4th, an all-day workshop. And you, of course, can find all the information on our education programs on our website at www.californiapreservation.org. And I hope that all of you have a good rest of the afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Zoot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.